Hello and welcome to Cereal at Midnight. I'm Heath and I got a conversation for you guys. I'm seeing a lot of use of the term Quentin Tarantino knockoff online. And it's usually in regard to movies that I really like, specifically 90s movies, but it's not limited just to 90s movies. I saw it about Bullet Train. Basically, like all these things come out. If it's got a quirky criminal in it, if it's got any sort of nonlinear storytelling in it, it's a Tarantino knockoff. But what really, what's hard for me is we're talking about 90s movies. We just got Out of Sight on 4K. We've got Clay Pigeons, which is a fantastic movie from David Dobkin, who would go on to direct Wedding Crashers, but it's not a comedy. It's a bleak crime movie that's actually great. Vince Vaughn is fantastic in it. If you want to see Vince Vaughn at his dark best, check out Clay Pigeons. Joaquin Phoenix is in there too, who would go on like Joker 20 years earlier. These movies to me are wonderful. Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. We're getting so much 90s crime movie history. For me, those movies are a product of the second New Hollywood. We had a New Hollywood in the 70s, and then we had a second coming of that in the 90s. And it didn't last long. It was pretty much over by the turn of the millennium. But during that time, and here's what I think what happened. I think Quentin Tarantino was the spark that ignited the flame that blew the doors off of this thing. But there's a lot of things that he gets credit for that he didn't necessarily invent. They were there in the zeitgeist. There's an entire generation of filmmakers from the late 80s, you can lump Soderbergh in here if you want to, the late 80s into the early 90s, who grew up on the New Hollywood of the 70s, all those auteur movies, the dark, nihilistic, realistic storytelling, the kind of anti-hero stuff, French Connection, whatever. There's a very specific 70s tone. It's a bleak, unhappy tone. And they had also seen, the westerns of the 50s, the film noir of the era that had sort of look at Kubrick's The Killing. We've got an ensemble cast of heist participants, quirky characters, specifically some of them are very strange. Asphalt Jungle, kind of the same thing. Interesting, flawed criminal characters that are very human. They're not perfect criminals. They're not stoic, dark criminals. He didn't invent a lot of this stuff, but he packaged it together in a way that gets acknowledged as being this thing. And it becomes part of pop culture. And we got to be careful that we don't revere pop culture. No one man is responsible for any particular thing or movement. Quentin Tarantino. To label, I've got a list here of that's about 15, 20 movies. To label these movies as Tarantino knockoffs is to rob them of their individual voice, to rob them of what they actually are. Maybe some of them are actually looking to cash in on the trends started by Quentin Tarantino. But I would like to push back against that a little bit and say that this was just what was happening in the culture at the time. The 90s, I was there, you guys. The 90s was it was a unique era. There was a very strange tone. And that's what pops up in these movies. The idea for also criminal movies, crime movies, right? They're easy to make because they don't cost a lot of money. You don't have to have special effects. You take a cast, you go somewhere, and you shoot it. And it's easy to do it because they're genre movies. They're more inviting than a romance or a hard drama or something like that. So I submit these for your evaluation. These are Heath's recommendations for 90s crime movies that deserve a second look, or hopefully in your case, a first look. This is not an attack on Quentin Tarantino. I like Tarantino. I own every single one of his movies. I saw most of them in the theater. This is a defense of movies that I think are being dismissed very glibly, there's a smugness to this that kind of bothers me because I'm like, hey, yeah, these movies are really good. Just check them out. So let's talk about Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead is one that has just hit Blu-ray from Imprint. I love this movie. I have been championing it for like 25 years. It's a dark movie. It's got a great ensemble cast. Andy Garcia is fantastic in it. It's about criminals. Basically, they know they're doomed, and they're just waiting for the hammer to fall. It's this sword of Damocles kind of a thing. 2 Days in the Valley. Some of these I'll just go a little more quickly than others, but here's the picture of the art so you can track it down. 2 Days in the Valley. Freeway. Reese Witherspoon. Kiefer Sutherland also great in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, which is another just really good. It's interesting. Some of these movies, they're hard to even talk about because they're so indefinable. They're so just a product of their time. But again, Tarantino didn't create the thing. He did package it together. We got to give credit where it's due. Tarantino is sort of the What did Don Murphy, when we talked to him, Transformers producer and the producer on Natural Born Killers, when I interviewed him, he said Tarantino is the last superstar director. I think that's true. And I think Tarantino knows that. And I think that was his goal. I think that's what he set out to be. And so everything has been a packaged, it's been a step towards that goal of being, that. Very bad things. What makes that a Tarantino knockoff? I don't know, but people say it's a Tarantino knockoff because it's dark comedy, because it finds humor in darkness. If that's all it takes, I mean, I don't know, you guys. The Boondock Saints. That's a movie that people used to talk about the Boondock Saints all the time. It was like the Shawshank Redemption of the crime. When people talk about, their favorite movies, it's the Shawshank Redemption. Like Shawshank Redemption reinvented movies for a whole new generation. The Boondock Saints was that for crime movies in the 90s. Like, the Boondock Saints. I like the movie. It's an interesting movie. Norman Reedus, Sean Patrick Flannery. The big hit. This does feel kind of Tarantino-esque. I would not be surprised if this was an acknowledged influence. If Tarantino was an acknowledged influence. But it's Mark Wahlberg, it's Lou Diamond Phillips, Christina Applegate. The premise of this movie, though, is just crazy. And it's got really great action. Here's another thing we haven't talked about yet. The influence of Hong Kong cinema in these 90s movies. This was the era when this stuff was just arriving here, really for the first time. We're just starting to see these things for the first time. So that's in the culture, too. It's influencing a lot of people. This is what I'm saying. A lot of these guys come from the same school, the same influence. They're all watching the same things and they want to make the same kinds of movies. Get Shorty always bothers me when people call that Tarantino knockoff, because Get Shorty is of course based on an Elmore Leonard story, and Elmore Leonard was a huge influence on Tarantino. I'm going to make a bold statement that if there had been no Elmore Leonard, there would be no Quentin Tarantino. He is that much of an influence. And of course, Tarantino would adapt. Jackie Brown is from an Elmore Leonard novel. And so anytime we get an Elmore Leonard story, people are like, sounds kind of like Tarantino. That's because Tarantino sounds like Elmore Leonard. We're skipping go to the source, which was Elmore Leonard. Hard 8 is a wonderful movie from Paul Thomas Anderson. I encourage everybody to watch Hard 8. Paul Thomas Anderson would go on to Boogie Nights and a huge, huge success. Even Licorice Pizza, we're still talking about this guy. Still doing his thing, but it pretty much started with Hard 8. And it has just hit Blu-ray from Imprint. And if you haven't seen it, however you can see it, if you want to rent it digitally on iTunes, whatever, you got to see Hard 8. It's a fantastic movie. Suicide Kings is one that has kind of fallen off the radar, but at the time, in the late, I think it was 97, I remember that was an early big seller on DVD. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels is very unfairly labeled as a Tarantino knockoff, but it's doing something completely different. Yeah, they're criminals. Yeah, they're kind of quirky. That's for a lot of the stuff. That's where the similarities end. If you're not watching these movies as movies on their, Guy Ritchie created an entire tone. His Cockney gangsters are legendary. And Tarantino wasn't doing Cockney gangsters. It's a whole different thing. Clay Pigeons I've already talked about. The Way of the Gun. This is a big one. Really dismissed at the time. I don't remember how successful it was, but it's the writer of The Usual Suspects, which itself is sometimes called a Tarantino knockoff, though it could not be further from the truth. If you've not seen Bryan Singer's The Usual Suspects, it's hitting 4K soon. We'll be talking about it a lot because it's an incredible movie. Guidance on a sauce. Gross Point Blank, another one that's very close to my heart. John Cusack as a hitman going back to his high school reunion. Super fun. Joan, his sister Joan, is in it as well. Dan Aykroyd. It's this is the kind of, these movies don't exist anymore. I wish that they did. Bullet Train seems to be getting kind of close to it, but again, hey, Bullet Train, Tarantino knockoff, right? Go is a movie that you gotta check out. Go is about a drug deal that's gone south, and we get the story from multiple different perspectives of the people who were there, and each segment of that movie goes on a different path. Bound by the Wachowskis, however you want to pronounce it. Before The Matrix, they do this movie with Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon. Yes, it's the movie with the lesbians in it, but it's so much more than that. Joey Pants is in it, Joe Pantoliano. It's a crime movie that's got, it's just a really, really well done sort of neo-noir with sort of like techno-industrial elements. It's hard to describe, but it's a great movie. Out of Sight, another one, Elmore Leonard source material. it bugs me to no end when I read a review for Out of Sight and they go, feels like Tarantino. No, it does not. It feels like Elmore Leonard. It feels like the master. It feels like the author himself. George Clooney's great in that movie. Jennifer Lopez, possibly never sexier than in that movie. Great. I've talked about it so much. I got a whole review for it here. And the last one I want to mention is called Trouble Bound. It's a 1993 movie that was, so it's 1 year after Reservoir Dogs. Michael Madsen is in it. And Patricia Arquette, the same year as True Romance. So does this movie exist because of the gateway that Tarantino opened up, that all the other filmmakers followed through? Possibly. It possibly does. But to say that, it's a Tarantino knockoff, it's a really good movie. Not everything works in the movie, but it's, that's the thing about these movies too, is that maybe not everything works. Maybe they're not home runs. Maybe they're not classics. But they certainly deserve to be seen and judged on their own merits. And thankfully, this is the thing I talk about all the time. Thankfully, we're in a better position than ever before to do that, because these movies are hitting disc like every week. We're getting one of these. So I don't know, it just breaks my heart a little bit when I see a movie that I love and I'm like, oh man, this movie is so good. And then someone's like, look what showed up in my mailbox, another Tarantino knockoff. I'm like, you're robbing it of its identity. You're taking something away from it. And have you even seen it to be calling it that? Part of that is the internet, just being the internet. Another part of that is the way the industry marketed some of these movies. Because Tarantino was such a huge influence in the 90s, you would see companies, especially Miramax, marketing movies as, basically it's the Pulp Fiction of so-and-so. It's the Pulp Fiction of 1996, or, whatever they would want to say. It's the Pulp Fiction of Serbia or whatever. And so I don't know, that part of it we didn't do. We didn't start the fire. It was always burning. But part of it we did. Part of it is this. A lot of the people that I'm seeing this from are younger than me. So here's where I'm like middle-aged movie guy. I'm movie dad. And I'm like, hey guys, if you like Pulp Fiction and you like Quentin Tarantino, maybe try some of these other movies. You might like them. So those are my recommendations, and we can certainly keep the conversation going because there's a lot more than what we just talked about. But I don't know what you think about this. This is kind of a big topic, but what I want to do here, my goal at Cereal at Midnight, is always to get people to check out more cool things. It's never to stop you from checking out cool things. It's never to go, hey, don't bother with that. It's to encourage you. That's why we don't talk about a lot of negative stuff here, because I want to encourage you to seek out cool things. That's the purpose of this video. Seek these movies out. Let me know what you think about them. I bet you'll enjoy them. But let me know. Talk about it in the comments below. Guys, thanks so much. Take care. Until next time, I'll catch you later.